Hello. So here we are at the 6th day. And as you know, this work that I'm doing is mainly to reconnect with my brother John, who taught for just over 50 years in public schools. But today I'm going to talk about another teacher. And I thought about trying to do it in a funny way, where I played both parts. Like an interview, I'd ask this teacher a question and pretend to be the teacher and answer it. But the teacher I'm going to be talking about, Kevin McIlvoy, never found me really that funny. I'm not sure why. I found him hilarious. But I met him in 1989, so I've known him, or I knew him for quite a long time. He's gone now, like my brother John. But he was one of the best teachers I could possibly have had. He went by Mac. Now, that felt like destiny to me because my dad was Mr. Mac. And for a big part of my career, I was Miss Mac. So, surely, this was meant to be. And I took him as a writing teacher. He eventually became the thesis advisor for my master's in creative writing in New Mexico State. And he was one of the most decent, kindly human beings I've ever met. And his philosophy about writing was what led me to employ his techniques to teach my own students. And so in that way, for the lion's share of my career, Mac had a part in training all of the students I worked with. Now, right now, I still lead a writing workshop. It's free, and we meet once a week, and it's based on how graduate writing workshops are designed. But how we run the workshop is based directly on Mac's training of me. And Mac's method sprung directly from his philosophy about both writing and teaching. And his philosophy might be stated, concentrate on what works. Now that sounds simple and sweet, and he was decent. And I think I should mention here that anybody who does not value decency or sees it as a sign of weakness, who sees kindness as a sign of fair treatment of all, you really shouldn't waste any more time listening to me. I don't think decency is a weakness. I don't think kindness is a weakness. And I don't think rage has any place in education. So, or hate. Maybe even more than rage, hate has no place in education. And I know my brother John eschewed hate the way you would eschew poison. So Mac did not concentrate on what did not work. When he read a writer's work, he pointed to what worked. It didn't matter whether it fit his taste. What mattered is whether it was effective and communicated well and did the things the writer wanted it to do. So in his workshop, much like I run my workshops, we begin with concentrating on what works. Now, before I get into the nuts and bolts of the workshop, I want to tell you something. This was not a namby-pamby, weakling way to respond to people's writing. It was disciplined. And I'll give you an example from when he was my thesis advisor. I would turn in 3 or 4 stories at a time for meetings with him one-on-one. So when Mac was my thesis advisor, I would turn in 3 or 4 stories for a one-on-one meeting with him, and he would read them and then comment on them afterward when we met together. So for one of our meetings, I had turned in 3 stories, and I came in for the meeting, he picked up the first story, and we talked about it for about 15 minutes, and then he put it down. And then the second story he picked up, it was 11 pages. And so this is what he had to say about it. "Wow, what a story," he said. "This paragraph at the top of page 10, amazing. The narrative is so evocative, it's so strong." And then he put the story down and went to the third story. Now, he didn't say it, but I knew what that meant. It meant, if I want to keep that story, I only get to keep that one paragraph. Just one paragraph out of 11 pages gets to stay. Everything else has to go in the trash. So first of all, I had to figure out what was working in that one paragraph, and I had to decide if I wanted to pursue a story that I had to throw away most of. I did pursue the story, and I did start over, and it ended up being about 11 pages. But the paragraph he had noticed was where I'd accidentally slipped into another point of view from the original start of the story. And it was better, it was stronger. And I saw what he was talking about. So I did what he expected me to do. Now, during Writer's Workshop, it's a little different. During Writer's Workshop, there's a group of graduate students typically, although some undergrads do it and high school students are capable of doing it too. In a workshop, one writer's work is up, and it gets discussed without the writer saying anything. This is a challenge. The first time you go through a writer's workshop, you have to sit there and listen to people talk about your work without saying a word. It was an important step in my growth as a human being to be able to sit still and listen to people talk about my work without saying a word. And Writer's Workshop was 90 minutes, so for a full hour I had to sit silently. And then I got 30 minutes to continue in the discussion where I got to talk. Now, the way Mac ran it and the way I run my writers group is you start with what works. We typically start with a description of the work and focus on the things that are really effective, that really matter and seem to be doing the work the writer wants done in the piece. We discuss this, and then Mac would range into asking questions. What is working in this piece? What are we expecting in the next pages if it's supposed to be continuing on, if it's part of a larger work? What things aren't clear? What things are confusing in here that we don't understand? Now, those things, those questions are very valuable because, first of all, as a writer, you start to figure out that not everybody's your reader. You're not trying to communicate with the whole world all the time. Sometimes you're just trying to communicate well with one other person. And so when you listen in a workshop, you start listening to the writers you admire and the readers you admire, and you start thinking about the kind of audience you're trying to appeal to other than yourself, because the first time, most writers will tell you, the first time they write something, their primary audience is themselves. Writing is a way of thinking. And so part of what a person does while writing is think about something, either an experience or an idea, and in thinking about it in writing, their ideas become more clarified and solid. So after the questions, there would be suggestions. Now, Mac never limited the number of suggestions, but he expected people to explain why they thought their suggestion would work. And I have absolutely embraced that thought. When you make a suggestion about how somebody should change writing, change what's in a piece of writing, you need to explain why you think that will strengthen the work. And see, this is not correction, this is not polishing, it's not like taking out spelling errors. Of course you should take out spelling errors, especially if they're unintentional. I mean, some people spell words the way they're said rather than the way they're spelled in the dictionary, and there's a purpose in that. But taking out errors, that's not really revision. What that is polishing, it's editing, it's the little picayune stuff. But the big suggestions need to be explained. And here's why. Mac was convinced that if you concentrated on what was weak or failing in a piece of work, you would constantly be trying to fix something that is not fixable, and thereby compromise the entire structure of the work. If something doesn't work, it has to go. It belongs in the trash, so throw it away. Concentrate on what works. And when a writer articulates what I think will make this piece work, and here's why, that writer is not just helping the other writer, the person they've read. That writer is helping the self. When we articulate what we value in writing and what we find strong in writing, we begin to inculcate it. We begin to make it matter to us. Now, part of Mac's workshop system was we were to write letters to the writers we read before the discussion, because he believed that discussions could influence readers too much and sort of blur the true understanding of a reader. That essentially in writing, you're communicating with one person at a time, just one. And therefore, the letter that's written back is the same sort of communication, just one person communicating with another. And that's incredibly powerful. So we had those letters with us, and they helped the discussion move too. It was great to have it right there. So when I had these smaller workshops with my students, I never made them go 90 minutes. That's just hard. But when I had these workshops with my seniors, what I would have them write were these letters, and they had possibly 5 paragraphs. The first paragraph was something I got from psychology. Mac did not require this, but it's called an anticipatory set. It's a way of reestablishing your relationship with the person to whom you're writing. And it's not really meaningful, it's just pleasant. It's, hi, how are you? I missed seeing you last week. I hope you're feeling better. I know you had a cold. That sort of thing. And for young people around today that have never received a letter from a friend or sweetheart, a written letter, whether typed or handwritten, that has physical presence in your life, I feel for you, because there is nothing sweeter than a letter from someone you love. It's just an incredible gift that someone gives you. And when I was a young person, we gave those all the time. We wrote letters and notes to each other. They were abundant and often quite beautiful. So, the letters that the students wrote, they started with anticipatory set. This is the way I see my relationship with you, without saying that sentence. And then the first paragraph, the body of the letter, the second paragraph of the letter, was strengths, at least 3 strengths, and they couldn't be nebulous. Oh, this is very strong writing. That's not a strength. You have to be specific. And I would say to the students, if you can't figure anything else out to say, pick the 3 best sentences in the whole piece and put them in that paragraph. This was my favorite sentence from your work. This was my second favorite. Those practices show, first of all, that you took the writer seriously enough to use some of your own judgment and your own ideas. And secondly, being specific is how you see what works. If you just nebulously saying, this is lovely, it doesn't really mean anything. It's pleasant, it's nice, but it doesn't mean anything. And some people, when they say they like something, they don't like it, they're lying. So you don't want them to be tempted to lie. You want them to focus on what works, even if the material in the piece doesn't appeal to them. It's not about what appeals to every reader. It's about what works for as many readers as possible. The second paragraph was questions. What questions did the draft elicit? 3 questions. So 3 strengths, 3 questions. You can guess what the next paragraph was. So first paragraph, anticipatory set. Second paragraph, strengths. Third paragraph, questions. Fourth paragraph, suggestion. And I required them to write only one suggestion with an explanation of why they thought their suggestion would help the writer. Articulate it. Be specific. Make a suggestion. And it can't be mean-spirited. It can't be, why don't you start over? Nope, 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 can't be that. Even if you want to say that, you don't say that. You get specific. And then they could, if they wanted to, write a fifth paragraph in the letter where they talked about their personal feelings about the subject. For example, if one of the writers wrote about a pet, someone might put in that final paragraph, I'm so glad you wrote about your pet. People don't take pets seriously, but I absolutely love my pet. And when I lost my kitty or my puppy, it broke my heart. Those kind of things about liking and feeling, can go in the fifth paragraph, but it's not a required thing. That emotional outpouring, though it's quite valuable, is not what writers should be evaluating in other writers. It's what we should be offering. That feeling should be offered to a friend. So, we would have the letters would follow the discussion when the students came in to talk about the work, would follow the letter form essentially, and when the writer spoke, it was often a very productive thing. When the writer finally got an opportunity to speak, it turned out wonderfully. Oftentimes, without being told to, writers would thank readers for taking their work seriously. What a wonderful thing to be able to do. I was so lucky, so very lucky to have Mac as a teacher. After I got my master's, I went on to get my MFA at Warren Wilson, largely at the encouragement of Mac, and largely because I wanted to spend more time listening to him and learning from him. Man, I loved his lectures. They were so good. They were funny and smart. He was such a delightful person. One time when I was meeting with him, it was on a weekend, and he had to take care of his sons because his wife had something she had to do during the time that we were having our meetings. So the boys came, and Mac had like a 2-room office. He ran a publication called Serape. And so he had like a 2-room office. And he had the boys playing quietly in the outer room. And they were, I guess they were about 10 and 8, maybe a little younger than that. Anyway, we were having a meeting, and after a while, it was near the ending of the meeting, and the boys, he called the boys in to visit with me a little bit so I could get to meet them and learn about them. He knew I was a real nut for kids. I just love talking with children, especially, you know, when they get to a certain age. A kid gets to 10 and they get just really themselves and interesting. Anyway, the boys came in and he goes, did you cut your hair? And the older boy had cut the younger boy's hair. So, it was so great. It was great watching Mac react, and it was great watching the boys react. They clearly adored him. They weren't afraid of him. But they respected him. And he adored them. I think of how lucky I was to know Mac. I think of how lucky I was to have John as a brother, and I think about young people who must be just devastated because I know John must have been a wonderful person to experience in the classroom. And I guess I want to encourage them by saying, you know, not everybody gets a teacher like that, whether you have them for a couple of years or just a few weeks. The reality is, a great teacher is a rare blessing. Not everybody gets them. Sometimes you find a teacher that's made just for you and nobody else in the room seems to like them. Doesn't matter. you find a teacher that you really appreciate and admire and respect, you must be thankful for that person. You don't have to tell them. You can just tell God. But I am really thankful that I had Mac as a teacher. And I believe many of my writing students would be thankful for him too if they knew who taught me how to be a kind and decent and disciplined teacher. That's it for today. My pseudo interview with Kevin McIlvoy, the Great. I hope you have a glorious day, and I hope you are joyous now, you gorgeous